But we're now going to transition to one of my favorite people on the planet, Tiffany Crank. And we're going to have a quick interview with Tiffany to talk a bit about how we are building bridges, as we've called it here, connecting with the community. It's one thing for me to go on and on about all these great treatments that we've developed and all these concepts, but we have shown you already, haven't we, that there is an access problem. There is a communication problem within multiple communities, including the African American community. And individuals like Tiffany have been so helpful in allowing us to be able to build bridges so that these great treatments can get to the right people, so that people can experience that better quality and quantity of life. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a privilege working with you for these last 2 years. I'm a total Tiffany fan, and I appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And I just have a few questions I'd love to ask you to get your insight as we go forward.
Yeah.
So let me start with this. Through this pandemic, sadly, there has been a tremendous tragedy across the country. But one of the things that it's perhaps shone a spotlight on is this whole notion of health equity.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can just teach us a little bit. What really is health equity, and what does it look like?
Yeah. And let me just say, likewise, Dr. McHale, I am a total Dr. McHale fan as well. And thank you guys so much for having me here just for a brief conversation just on this super important topic. But to answer your question, I really like to explain health equity very simply. And it's really ensuring that all individuals have the opportunity to be as healthy as they can be. And that sounds pretty simple, but unfortunately, everybody's journey to health is not necessarily created equal. So there are individuals and and communities that don't have that opportunity to be as healthy as they can be because of obstacles. And the obstacles are pretty big deals. We're talking obstacles of poverty. We're talking about obstacles of discrimination, obstacles of access, and not just access to healthcare. That's kind of a drop in the bucket, but we're talking access to being able to work a good job that pays a fair and livable wage, access to safe and affordable housing, access to a quality education. Access to a safe environment. So all of those things are indicators for better health, right? And so in our quest for health equity, because there are disparities that exist and persist over all of those things, that's ultimately, kind of challenging our quest for health equity, because it's a larger picture to address a lot of the things that are preventing people from having that opportunity to be as healthy as they can be.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so striking to me that health equity may be almost the phrase of the year for the last 2 years. Although sometimes I feel like it's really health inequity, sadly, that we have seen. And I shared earlier, Tiffany, as you saw, of course, that there is a tremendous inequity, in particular myeloma. In some contexts, as we're focusing today, of course, in our work in Charlotte, but we have Empower programs across the country. Mm-hmm. And in certain jurisdictions, we found, for example, in parts of Florida, where the survival difference in myeloma between white patients and Black patients is the most disparate of any cancer. Wow. Meaning that myeloma is the worst cancer, as it were, when we compare the outcomes. And so it's very distressing in one way. And I know that we can sometimes focus just on the disparity, but we want to obviously overcome that, and that's where we're going to come to in a moment. But when you mention those health disparities, we inevitably talk about the social determinants of health, which of course are at the very heart of the challenge that we face here. Help us understand, why do these disparities continue to exist in these communities? And maybe you can shed a little bit of light for those who aren't as familiar with the concept of social determinants of health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could probably talk about root cause for an hour, but I promise I won't. But in a nutshell, if you think about a lot of structures and systems that we have in place in the US were established during a time where inequality was the norm, right? It was legal and it was widespread to have these situations of inequality. So the very establishment of a lot of systems and structures in our country were set up to be unequal at best. And we have made progress, of course. We've made so much progress in civil rights and women's rights and, fair treatment of persons with disabilities and all these things we've made progress in. But there's still so many layers to peel back a system that kind of wasn't set up to focus on equity to start with. So although we've made a ton of progress, there's a lot to still unpack at a systems level. And just as a quick example, I'll just use like our education system, our public health, our public schools. So they're funded, partly by the state, partly by the federal funding. But in large part, public schools are funded by the tax base of the neighborhoods that the school is in. So you kind of get in this cycle where poor neighborhoods have poorly funded schools. And when we say that educational attainment, we know that's not only a great indicator of health. It's also a great indicator of wealth, right? And so we tell kids, go to school, get a good education, and all your problems will be solved. You can use education as a tool to get out of poverty. But students are facing a catch-22 when they're in a poor community that has maybe a substandard education system, and that really makes it hard for them to compete, post high school. Especially against students that have had many other resources and come from areas that are very well resourced. So that's a structural problem. That's a structural inequality that kind of leads us down the road to these health disparities. So like you said, a lot of times we see the disparity, and so we have to remember to take a step back and see if we can see the cause of that disparity. Does that disparity have a greater structural root cause? And oftentimes it does.
Tiffany, you just have such a marvelous way of making complicated things straightforward and simplifying this. So thank you so much. So we understand a little bit more about the issue of health equity and sadly the disparity and the root cause of those. But in the minutes we have remaining, let's turn and try to think together a little bit about how we can actively work with communities to improve these disparities. And I know this is such a essential part of the work that you do, and we appreciate it so much. But tell us a little bit about this concept of community engagement. It's another sort of catchphrase that we've heard a lot this year, but tell us a bit more about that and how what you're doing to try and overcome some of these health disparities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, talking about the systemic and the larger issues, a lot of times we can, kind of get overwhelmed, right? So I heard a person use the comment that we try to boil the ocean one time, and I was like, that is so true. So one thing it's important to is not boil the ocean, is to really target and focus on things that we can do. What impact can we make? And when we talk about community engagement and engaging with communities, it's really important to remember that word "with." Community engagement should be a partnership with that community. Communities should certainly be involved in the things that concern them. And I think sometimes, especially as healthcare and other organizations, we kind of want to swoop in with all the answers and all the resources and just let communities know what we need to do to save them. But we have to remember sometimes communities have been burned in the past with those type of experiences. So if we really want to gain buy-in from a community and really work with that community on certain projects, we have to go in with the heart of listening and with keeping the community voice at the center of what we do. We have to really try to meet people where they are and find out what they value. And again, listen, that is very important. I'll use the Empower Charlotte project as an example. When we have partnership with wonderful IMF and LCI, and when we came to the table, one of the first things we wanted to do was find out how can the community best receive the information that we wanted to give them on myeloma. So we did focus groups. We connected with our Minority Cancer Advisory Council to which is a panel of community leaders in their own right, to ask the right questions, and get that buy-in up front. So one of the first things I always tell people with community engagement is you want to listen, and you want to have community involved planning. Identifying those local leaders or groups, and having focus groups not only gives you information that can help you with planning the program, but it also gives you kind of that initial base of community champions that can then, they're very engaged, they're connected, and then they can then take that out to the larger community to kind of snowball efforts around the project. Also, really important for community engagement is to have a promotion strategy. So once you listen to the community, actually take that and help develop a really tailored and specific strategy to reach that community. The content is going to be very important. It is very important to make sure it's culturally relevant, that it is health literate to the groups that you want to make. And again, these are the things we kind of did with Empower Charlotte as we developed and created this community-facing education program. Being flexible and adapting, I mean, insert a whole pandemic into a plan, and you will learn to operate on your toes. So again, with the Empower Charlotte program, one of the things we really learned and developed a muscle for was adaptation and flexibility, and addressing the priorities of the community first, and then kind of layering in the information that we also want the community to get. The toolkit also was really, really helpful because that allowed the community to be able to kind of cherry pick what was relevant to them. So the Empower Charlotte toolkit that was available, maybe they didn't want an in-person presenter to come. Maybe they weren't comfortable with that, but maybe they could access some of the videos and the educational tools. So again, just in a nutshell, it really wraps back into engage in connecting with the community, finding out how to best get them the information, and developing programming around that.
That's fantastic, Tiffany. Thank you so much for sharing that. It has been a journey indeed, and I'll be sharing a little bit later what we've done with the Empower Charlotte program and beyond. And one of, I think, of the key messages you've left with us today is that we can't look at every community in the same way. Every community is unique and different, and if we're not listening at the start, like you said, then we're not going to know the needs. We're just about to wrap up, Tiffany, but I just want to give you the last word. If there's any sort of final take-home messages that you want to share with us. You've shared with us a wealth of information in a short period of time, but any final take-home messages you want to leave with our listeners today before we move on?
Yeah, so I'll say it's two main things that I would really want to leave with everyone. The first thing is a call to action that I always like to make is for everyone to understand that perspective is everything, and to understand that you have lived life, I have lived life from my vantage point, from your vantage point, and the things you've experienced and seen has kind of developed your perception on things. But just understand and acknowledge that there are people that have a very different experience and very different vantage point from how they've lived and experienced life and healthcare. So once you're able to kind of understand that your view is not the only view, it's easier to stop blaming kind of the individual for certain behaviors, but we have to place the blame on the system, and we have to really fix the system. And so that kind of allows you to, advocacy is personal. So once you kind of have that systems look, finding things that you identify with as something that you want to help enact change, whether that's volunteering, if it's the educational system, doing after school program. I mean, people can do things that they're passionate about to really move the needle in a small way that translates to a big way in communities. That's advocating for communities at the local level, at voting, all kinds of things that people can really get involved to do once you see how it's working from a systems perspective. So that's the first thing, is please jump in and don't hesitate to be hands-on to really help move the needle in what may feel like a small way, but it's actually a really big way in communities. And the second thing I'll just leave you guys with is kind of a tip for anybody out there that wants to engage with communities. You really want to make your friends before you need them, right? So if you're in a role where you're going to be doing community engagement with a certain population, if it's possible, don't let the first time they see you be when you're asking for what you need. Find out what's important to that community. Show up for certain events. Volunteer for things. You can become involved in the community before you actually need to ask them for anything, right? If you have sponsorship dollars, maybe you give a few $100s to sponsor a festival or a race or a run or something that's important to them, because ultimately that's going to open that door for that relationship to be reciprocated. So biggest advice I could give for anybody out there that wants to do a community engagement is really try to go out there and make your friends now. Make your friends before, that grant is approved and you have to go in with the big ask and things like that.
Wow, that's just tremendously insightful, Tiffany. I hope I can call you my friend because I love the way you become friends.
Absolutely.
But so true, isn't it, in the community that we follow these amazing principles of perspective and of engagement and indeed of friendship, as you've described. This is marvelous. Thank you so much. Thank you again for all that you've done in your own work at Atrium Health and specifically with Empower Charlotte. It's just a privilege to be able to work with you, and we're very, very thankful that you joined us today.